hello everyone, and welcome to ProLine College Football Preview Edition for 2014. Going to be looking at the Big Ten Conference. I'm John Creighton in Las Vegas, joined by Jeff Side, who runs Las Vegas Sports Services. Going to run through every Big Ten team for the fall. First, if you want to get on board a Jim Bites Early Bird Football Special, you're going to play the entire month of August, NFL preseason from Jim, including his preseason game of the year, for $29. Just call 1-866-841-1655. Jeff, how do they get aboard with LVSS?
We're going to get the entire NFL preseason for $19. 1-866-575-8916. Last year I had five plays rated at least 20 stars. I won 4 of those, 4 and 1 of the big plays last year. This year you get the entire preseason, $19, 1-866-575-8916.
All right, we're going to look at the Big Ten today, and Ohio State started a perfect 16-0 in 2 years under Urban Meyer. However, they've lost the last 2 games, including the Big Ten title game to Michigan State last year. Wisconsin was 6-2 in the conference last year. Iowa and Nebraska at 5-3. So the Buckeyes really have dominated of late. There's also 2 new teams to the Big Ten this year. That's Maryland and Rutgers. You got the Michigan State Spartans. They're the defending Big Ten champs, but Ohio State, Michigan State, and Wisconsin are certainly the favorites. So Jeff, let's start with the Urban Meyer's Buckeyes. How do they look?
Well, last year the problem was defense going into the season. This year it's going to be the opposite. The Buckeyes were 12-2 last year, 6-7-1 against the spread. They ended the season in 0-5 against the spread run, mostly because the defense couldn't stop anybody. This year it's going to be the opposite problem. Of course, good news is the quarterback Braxton Miller is back for a senior season. The bad news is the Buckeyes lose 4 offensive linemen and their 4 offensive line starters, plus running back Carlos Hyde. This season, the running backs are going to be Ezekiel Elliott and Dontre Wilson, both played well last year in limited action, but defensively the front line looks solid. But one of the top recruits is linebacker Raekwon McMillan. Secondary looked good in the spring game. For once, Ohio State shouldn't be embarrassed about its non-conference schedule. They played the obligatory MAC team, Kent State, but then they faced Navy on the road, and then Virginia Tech, and later Cincy at home. The conference schedule looks relatively easy. They get both newcomers, Rutgers and Maryland, and they have 2 tough road games, Penn State, Michigan State, and then end the season at home versus Michigan. The game versus Michigan State is going to be a big revenge game, of course, because they lost to them in the championship game last year. But that game probably would decide the East Division champion. By the way, the Big Ten this year finally got smart and got rid of those ridiculous headings for the division, legends and leaders. Now it's basically the East to West, which should be for a Midwest football conference. It shouldn't be something fancy. It should be East and West. But I'm looking for Ohio State to maybe go 10-2, 11-1 this year, John.
So now we can understand what divisions they're in. I'll look at the defending champion, Michigan State Spartans, 13-1 straight up last year, perfect 8-0 in the conference, 9-4-1 against the spread. And that was quite a bounce back year for the Spartans. They were 3-5 in the Big Ten the previous year, so it was a terrific turnaround. They've got 8 players returning on offense, 5 on defense. The offense was very impressive last year. Not great overall stats. They were 82nd in the country in passing, just over 211 yards per game, but they were great balance, 173.8 yards rushing, and they were produced points, 29.4 points per game. They found a keeper in quarterback Connor Cook. He will be a junior this season. 22 touchdowns, 6 interceptions for the youngster, over 2,700 yards passing. In fact, he's 9-0 as a Big Ten starter for Mark D'Antonio. And they will be balanced again. You get senior tailback Jeremy Langford. He's back. This kid had 1,422 yards rushing, 4.9 yards per carry, 18 touchdowns. They do have only 2 starters back on the offensive line, but the wide receiver, they have Tony Lippett back, 613 yards, and Keith Mumphrey, he had 299. So this will be a potent and balanced offense again. And boy, the Spartans were so dominant on defense last year, number 1 in the country. They do lose a couple of key players, giving up just 13.2 points per game. That was 3rd in the country. But there are a lot of talent returning to this team. First of all, the defensive ends. You got bookends, junior defensive end Shalik Calhoun. He had 8.5 sacks last year. He's back along with senior Marcus Rush. He had 5 sacks. So this team is going to be, again, stuffing the run and putting pressure on opponents. And the schedule, well, they got a tough one early on week 2, September 6th. They're going to be playing at Oregon. And after that, the road schedule is easier. They do have home games against Nebraska, Michigan, and November 8th is the big one, as you mentioned, against Ohio State. They beat Ohio State 34-24, a 5.5-point dog. And keep this in mind. Michigan State last year was 3-4 against the spread at home. That's a long trend because for the last 62 home games, they're 23-39 against the spread. So they've been a better team to wager on the road as opposed to at home. All right, how about the Michigan State Spartans rivals? And that's Michigan Wolverines. Which direction are they heading?
Probably a lateral move for Michigan. They were 7-6 straight up last year, 7-6 against the spread this year. And they'll have a better record than that, but I don't see them competing for the Big Ten championship. Last year they lost 6 of the last 8 games. 7 games they won were against relatively weak competition, except for Notre Dame. They averaged 42 points the first 7 games, just 20 the last 6 games, and as a result, they have a new offensive coordinator, Doug Nesbier, who came over from Alabama, which means they'll probably run more this year. In 4 years, Michigan's rushing average has gone from 239 yards per game down to 126. The offensive line is relatively young with a combined total of just 31 starts. Quarterback Devin Gardner was very inconsistent last year, turned the ball over too much. They're probably this season with Nesbier, as I said, they'll probably try to run more, but they lose top wide receiver Jeremy Gallon. They return tight end Devin Funchess, and otherwise the receiving corps is pretty inexperienced. Defense returns 7 starters, including 2 top linebackers, Jake Ryan and Desmond Morgan. Surprising stat: in the last 39 road games, the Wolverines are 18-21 straight up, 16-23 against the spread. Something that would be that would be very surprising for Michigan teams down through the years, but that's going to be something they're going to have to improve on. Circle August 30th for a big revenge game. They play Appalachian State. Remember, in 2007, the Mountaineers came into the Big House as 31.5-point underdogs and beat Michigan in one of the biggest upsets of all time. So that's going to be an interesting game. I know Michigan will be a big favorite again. They get Notre Dame and Utah at home, Michigan State, Northwestern, Ohio State on the road. I think the best they can hope for here is 9-3, probably more like 8-4, John.
Boy, Michigan's going to be hearing all summer long about that Appalachian State game, too. That's not going to be a creep up on them like it did a few years ago back in 2007. I'm going to take a look at the Maryland Terrapins. They are new to the Big Ten. They're off a 7-6 season, 7-6 against the spread as well, but they were just 3-5 in the ACC, 8-5 over the total. They've actually improved under Randy Edsall in his time there from 2 wins to 4 and then 7 last year. However, there are some concerns for this season moving into the Big Ten. He likes a balance on offense, and they were potent enough at 26.2 points per game, 248.5 yards passing. That was 48th in the nation, and they were 148.4 yards rushing per game. You got 4 starters back on the offensive line. Then you got the skill positions. Junior running back Brandon Ross, 776 yards, was very good. And then you got the quarterback, senior C.J. Brown, 13 touchdowns, 7 picks, over 2,000 yards passing, and he's a terrific runner. He was second on the team with 576 yards rushing, but he is often injured, and that's a concern with some of the wide receivers, too, because Maryland has a terrific wide receiver in Stephon Diggs, but he broke his leg last October. He missed recent spring practice. He had 587 yards in limited action. Boy, they keep him healthy. He's a punt returner, and he's an electric wide receiver. Also, senior wide receiver Dion Long is back, 489 yards. They say he has NFL talent, but he played half the season last year because of a broken tibia. So the pieces are there to be balanced and a good offense. A lot of these guys just haven't been healthy last year. The defense really wasn't that bad, giving up 25.3 points per game. That was 55th in the nation. The good news is 10 of the 11 players who started the bowl game for Maryland are back. Bad news is when they stepped up against Clemson, they gave up 40 points and lost. They lost 63-0 to Florida State, and even Wake Forest smacked them around 34-10. And then Marshall in the bowl game, they lost to Marshall 31-20. So they do have some weaknesses on defense. And remember, they're stepping up in competition quite a bit here. And finally, the schedule is not conducive for a good season for the Terps at all. They're going to play probably the toughest 16 Big Ten schedule. Ohio State, Iowa, at Wisconsin, at Penn State, Michigan State, and at Michigan. So all in all, the injuries and stepping up in the schedule, I'm going to say that Maryland takes a little bit of a step back here and no bowl for the Terps. All right, Jeff, Penn State, boy, they've been a whirlwind on and off the field with chaos and change for much of the last couple of years. Have they found any stability?
Well, they had stability there for a couple of years. Bill O'Brien did a great job there after taking over in a very difficult situation and did a tremendous job there. He went to the NFL. Last year, Penn State 7-5, straight up 5-7 against the spread. James Franklin takes over from Vanderbilt, so I wanted to see how that goes. He did the same thing as Vanderbilt. He came into a losing program and turned it around, so they probably found about the best candidate they could get. They're set at quarterback with Christian Hackenberg. 9 starters are back on defense. Only 4 on offense are back. 3 starters on the offensive line are gone, plus they lose top receiver Allen Robinson. Bill Belton is back at running back, but the running back in the spring game that impressed the most was sophomore Coach Ipparelli. They lost top defense. Two of the top defensive ends are back. C.J. Alanian and Deion Barnes, plus linebacker Mike Hall is back. They open the season in Ireland, of all places. They play Central Florida there, and the rest of the schedule is very favorable. The toughest road game is at Michigan, and they get Northwestern, Ohio State, and Michigan State at home. So depth is always going to be a problem with Penn State for the next several years because of the sanctions. But this team with that schedule and with the quarterback, with a set of quarterback, they can go 9-3 this year, John.
Okay, I'm going to take a look at the Indiana Hoosiers. What you need to know about them is rather simple. 5-7 record last year, 5-6-1 against the spread, 3-5 in the Big Ten. Here's the key, 9-3 over the total. Now, why was that? Obvious. Unstoppable offense, but they can't stop anybody on defense. The offense last year for the Hoosiers, 38.4 points per game. That was 17th in the nation. They can kill you so many different ways. 306.7 yards passing was 17th in the country. Just over 200 yards rushing was 30th in the nation. And Kevin Wilson is not afraid, the coach, of using 2 quarterbacks, and he's got 2 of the best in the Big Ten returning. In 6'5", junior Nate Sudfeld, he had 21 touchdown passes, 9 interceptions, 60% completions, over 2,500 yards passing. And then you got the junior quarterback, Trey Robinson. He was just as good, 15 touchdowns, 4 picks, 60% completions. And he's got plenty of skill guys, these guys do, to work with. Junior running back Tavon Coleman had 958 yards rushing, a whopping 7.8 yards per carry. They got 5'7" senior wide receiver Shane Wynn, 633 yards. So, I mean, they're going to march up and down the field again this year. But, boy, this defense was horrendous. 38.8 points per game. They ranked 117th in the nation. They were dead last in the Big Ten, allowing 528 yards per game, 6.7 yards per play. So they have a new defensive coordinator in Brian Knorr. He does have 10 starters back, but 5 of the 10 were freshmen and sophomores. So they struggled. They were bad, but they were also very young, and they're hoping that getting some experience is going to step them up. But not helping them will be the schedule. They got a brutal 7-week stretch from October 11th through November 22nd. Indiana's going to play Iowa, Michigan State at Michigan, Penn State at Rutgers, and at Ohio State. So the coach wants to get this program to a bowl, but I don't see it happening in 2014, although I do see them, after going 9-3 over the total, this is another team to look at over the total in the fall. All right, Jeff, as we wrap up this part of the conference, how about how's Rutgers look?
Well, normally they would look good because they have 9 offensive starters, 6 defensive starters back. But of course, it's going to be a big upgrade here, going from the AAC to the Big Ten. So that's going to be the problem here. They'll probably finish near the bottom of the division, even though they have a lot of returning players. 6-7 last year, 5-8 against the spread. Senior quarterback Gary Nova threw for 10 touchdowns, 14 picks, and completed 55% of his passes last year. His main competition would be from junior Mike Bamani. Senior running back Paul James, last year, 881 yards, 5.6 yards per carry. But the most impressive running back in the spring game was Desmond Peoples, 18 carries for 85 yards. They returned tight end Tyler Croft and plus 2 top wide receivers, Leonte Carew and Ruhan Peel. Defensive front 4 would be the strength of the defense. But last year, Rutgers ranked near the bottom in pass defense, 120th in the country in pass defense. So they need a big improvement there. They open at Washington State, but they have 2 winnable non-conference games. They're against FCS Howard and plus Tulane. But they had 3 sheer losses on the road. They play at Ohio State, at Michigan State, at Nebraska. They get Wisconsin at home, and they're probably, as I said, they'll probably finish last or second last in the division, and they'll probably be fortunate to win 5 games overall, John.